Okay, it is 1 minute past 9 o'clock. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about the future of KYC processes. Knowing your customers has never been more topical than today, as more and more businesses are moving to digital channels, while regulatory requirements set clear requirements, for example, in situations such as customer onboarding. And therefore, we are delighted to have two KYC experts here with us today, Laura Valo and Linda Lamminpää from Deloitte Finland. In addition, we have Signicat's own expert, Thomas Osinga, with us to walk through the practical aspects of a customer due diligence process. On a practical note, you're welcome to ask questions during the webinar by using the chat function in Zoom. We will address the questions during the Q&A part of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded, so if you need to leave early, you will receive the full recording afterwards. Now I'll give the stage to Laura and Linda.
Yes, thank you, and welcome on my behalf as well. And if we can move on to the next slide, then we can introduce ourselves to you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Lamminpää, and I work as a senior consultant in Deloitte Financial Crime Team in Risk Advisory Unit in Finland. And my previous background is in Nordic Bank, where I used to work as a senior specialist in KYC units.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Laura Valo, and I also work at Deloitte Finland in their financial crime risk team. I have a 7-year background in AML and especially in KYC, and previously worked in the KYC department of a Nordic bank. So we can move on to the next slide. And here we have an overview of the contents of today's presentation. So we will first briefly discuss the recent changes in the world affecting KYC, and then we will move on to going over the trends affecting the development of the KYC processes. So we can move on to the next slide and get started. So KYC processes and their development have been on the rise for the past decade. With advancements in specifications in AML legislation, KYC processes have not only become one of the most important aspects of an institution's AML operations, but they are in fact one of an institution's most important core processes because they affect so many of its other processes and operations. The functionality of KYC processes has significant implications on customer satisfaction as well. And unfortunately, KYC has traditionally been viewed quite negatively by customers because the process requires quite a bit of time and effort. As technology continues to develop and customers expect to be able to handle everything online with fast results, there has been a need for KYC to move towards digitalization as well. And last year, the coronavirus pandemic showed us that the world can essentially be shut down in a matter of weeks. As a result, the pandemic largely sped up the need for this digital development, as it had a huge impact on both financial crime and KYC, and highlighted several functions of KYC processes that still need development. Also, because of the unstable situation in the world caused by the pandemic, financial crime has increased and moved largely online. This means that cybercrime has become more diverse and international. Tracking down criminals is now more difficult. Less cash is spent. Money launderers have shifted online, which means that funds are transferred to cryptocurrencies and online wallets. So nowadays, potential victims can be located anywhere in the world. And as criminals have a wider playing field for different forms of crime, for example, financial institutions must be able to detect this and react very quickly. This means that specialists must be able to use technological advancements to focus on investigating material changes and relevant suspicious transactions instead of spending their time constantly manually investigating, updating, and verifying KYC data. And lastly, onboarding and other KYC processes and customer communication have also essentially been forced to move online as a result of the pandemic. So with this all in mind, we have gathered a few important digital and technological advancements and trends that could be used to further develop and improve KYC processes in order to be more seamless, rapid, diverse, and customer-friendly in order to keep up with both criminal activity and the continuous changes and advancements in the world. So if we move on to the next slide, we have an overview of important advancements affecting KYC processes, which we will discuss in more detail during the remainder of this presentation. And next slide, please. The first trend we will talk about is digital identification. Traditionally, the need for physical ID verification has made the onboarding process of new customers quite time-consuming, as it has required a customer's physical presence at a branch, which often results in poor customer experiences and, in some cases, the abandonment of the process altogether. The need for the development of customer identification methods has become more apparent as the world becomes increasingly digital, technology is constantly evolving, and customers, especially from younger generations, want to do business virtually. This need has now become more apparent in the past year, of course, with the closure of bank branches and all the coronavirus restrictions. It has become more difficult to physically identify customers face-to-face, which has led issues for both customers and institutions that have inadequate digital services. So with the replacement of physical documents with digital IDs and AI technology, allowing customers to present their identity documents virtually, institutions could offer new customers a seamless and faster onboarding process without the need for a physical appointment. This would also provide a straightforward way for existing customers to open new products and services and update their KYC information if, for example, their ID has expired. For this reason, the Financial Action Task Force has also strongly encouraged institutions to use digital identification methods where possible. Many digital identification solutions based on ID scanning and selfie videos have entered the market quite recently. So these allow customers to take a picture of their IDs, for example, on a smartphone, followed by a moving selfie video. This tool then compares the information on the IDs with the customer's KYC data and the picture on the ID to the selfie video to make sure that the ID in question actually belongs to the customer. And here, especially the selfie video where the person is actually moving is really important for digital identification, because otherwise there's always a risk of identity theft. Someone could steal another person's ID, find a person of that person online, picture of that person online, and do business as that person. So using these in combination with anti-fraud tools could lead to successful remote identification of, for example, a company's beneficial owners, perhaps even more accurate identification than checking IDs traditionally, and of course, improved customer experiences as customers also save time and effort. This also allows institutions to save money while helping to ensure that they have adequate KYC processes, remain compliant with AML legislations, and therefore hopefully avoid possible fines and sanctions in the future. However, it should also be kept in mind that not everyone, especially customers from older generations, has smartphones or the ability to identify themselves digitally in this way, so there should not be a complete shift to purely digital methods. But if we move on to the next slide, we can talk about the next trend, so virtual customer communication. The need to further develop video banking tools has also emerged recently, and especially in 2020. Virtual and video banking tools, so tools that enable video communication safely, give institutions the ability to carry out customer onboarding processes and other required KYC procedures remotely in accordance with AML requirements. These tools allow institutions to be sure that they are communicating with a real and identified customer rather than someone pretending to be someone else. If, for example, the customer has to first log into their online banking account using their banking credentials to access the video call. Customers themselves can also use these, for example, to contact their banks regardless of the day of the week and the time of the day. For example, when they need to update any necessary KYC information, as they may be able to communicate outside traditional business hours of a branch. So this makes life easier for customers because they no longer have to travel to bank branches physically to stand in line or wait several days for a customer meeting. Customers also don't have to fear identity theft. The fact that the customer is in the video connection live is much safer than just a normal call with sound only. So with this technology, institutions remain compliant, costs can be reduced, both institutions and customers save time, and customer experiences can also be improved. This means that developing these tools continuously are very important for the future of a timely, diverse, and customer-friendly KYC process. At the same time, however, as I mentioned earlier, it is particularly important that institutions find a balance or hybrid solution between the provision of service channels, because there may be some shortcomings in the digital services of customers from older generations in particular, or they may, for example, lack a computer with a camera, which can then create challenges for the use of services. So we can move on to the next slide, and Linda, go ahead.
Yes, so now let's move on to new technologies that are also used in the trends that Laura just mentioned. So let's start with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence utilizes cognitive technology for human reasoning. What it makes different to robotics or automation, it has actually an ability to making decisions. Therefore, AI is an important opportunity for KYC processes, and it can have very positive effects to customer satisfaction. With artificial intelligence, it's possible to build methodologies that react to information given by the customer, for example, in self-service KYC channels. It can also react to changes in account transactions. What is more, artificial intelligence can be also utilized for screenings, such as PEP, FATCA, and sanction screenings. Possible benefits when using artificial intelligence are, firstly, the optimization of KYC processes, as it can be very important workforce. AI has an ability to recognize trends and patterns, and this is very important in KYC processes. It also has the ability to learn and develop based on the data. And AI is actually very potential for handling large amount of data because, for example, machine learning model, which is one of the AI technologies, evolves on its own when more data is generated. So more data, the artificial intelligence works better. Even though there is a lot of benefits, there are also risks that needs to be taken into account when generating processes with AI. One of the challenges is to invest in applications that don't meet the needs. In the worst scenario, this can affect in a negative way to customer satisfaction if the artificial intelligence doesn't work in the way that it wanted to be worked. Also, if there is too little data to be utilized, then the artificial intelligence and its human reasoning can make very straightforward decisions, and therefore it doesn't work as it should be. There are several providers in the market, so make your choice very carefully and also utilize external experts if you are not so familiar with these technologies. We can move on to the next slide. In 2003, there was 25% of all the data in the world stored digitally, and today the number is already 99%. The constant growth of KYC data volumes requires overall management that can be developed with modern cloud services. Especially in this year of remote work, cloud services have been very crucial. When transferring data to the cloud, there are a lot of possibilities, but also risks. When listing the positive sides of cloud services, first of all, they are very flexible. And then also cloud providers are able to maintain the cloud services, so it doesn't require in-house IT units. Hybrid solutions are very common, which mean that the data is stored in cloud, but the critical data is kept in-house. And this is very common, especially in the KYC processes. When transferring data to cloud, it is very important to take into account GDPR and also the location of the data. If your corporate operates in European Union, it's recommended to keep data within European Union or even in your own country. So please make your research when choosing the cloud provider, because there is also several providers in the market, and keep eye on these matters. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide. Intelligent automation and robotics are very common, and automation can be utilized for high volume manual and repetitive process steps to increase cost efficiency. The further robots and artificial intelligence enabled operations are programmed to analyze and fill in KYC data, the more time KYC experts will have to investigate suspicious activities. So this intelligent automation is also very important workforce nowadays with artificial intelligence. In the best scenarios, intelligent automation affects positively to customer experience. In these scenarios, the customer information is gathered by robots beforehand customer contact. So when the customer arrives to the customer meeting, only the missing information and the key point questions are asked. So all the transactions and like basic informations are gathered beforehand, and therefore in a customer meeting, when customer is actually wanting to buy a new product or anything, only the relevant questions are asked. And on the business side, intelligent automation can also be used to create smoother and higher quality customer encounters in terms of updating KYC data. So this also streamlines collaboration between branches and KYC experts. Yes, and we can move on to the next slide, which is data analytics. When it comes to KYC information, it contains a huge amount of potential data from a business perspective. So not only from the AML side, but also for the business perspective. And customers nowadays expect more customized and personalized service and marketing. And the key point here is to leverage this data analytics. When looking at the words that are collected within this slide, all of this information can be actually found from KYC data from one place. So why not to utilize this information? Data analytics can also complement the expertise of specialists and even obtain results that would not have been found without using data analytics. So the key point here is to utilize the KYC information as much as possible, so you will have a very good business benefits from it. Thank you. We can move on.
Yes, so the last trend we will talk about is developing a unified KYC process workflow, which we've divided into two separate advancements. So we previously discussed how cybercrime has increased and how institutions need to be able to react quickly. This means that the KYC tool itself should also work seamlessly and interactively to support this, so that the entire process runs smoothly and that all necessary customer data is collected swiftly and according to the customer's risk rating. Traditionally, filling in the KYC tool, calculating the customer's risk rating, and ensuring that the amount of information collected on the customer corresponds to the customer's risk rating has required a lot of manual work and time. So one solution to this is developing and using an interactive KYC tool, which uses modern technological solutions that were talked about earlier in this presentation to collect and react to the information and data added to it. This tool would automatically collect and pre-fill certain basic customer data from different internal and external systems. activate free text fields based on the information added in order to enter additional information. For example, if a customer sends money to a high-risk country on a monthly basis and this information is added to the KYC tool, then the tool automatically reacts to that information and opens up a free text field so these foreign payments can be explained. It incorporates the customer risk assessment methodology and therefore also helps to calculate the customer's risk rating automatically based on the added data, which saves time and eliminates the need for manual calculations. It also ensures that the amount of data collected corresponds to the customer's risk rating. That is, if the customer is a high-risk customer based on the information added and the risk rating calculation, then the KYC tool would automatically activate an EDD section and require additional information about certain factors, for example, such as the source of funds or possibly foreign payments. And finally, this tool can be used in conjunction with workflow management systems and tools, that is either separate or incorporated in the same tool, to help determine the frequency and monitoring of KYC updates. And for example, suggest the next date when the customer's KYC data should be updated. This intelligent tool would then allow the institution to focus AML resources on actual risk and prioritize the customers who pose the greatest risk. As such, KYC experts get to focus on investigating suspicious events instead of purely manual work, which increases employee satisfaction, and are also able to detect and react to suspicious behavior much faster. Also, if all customer KYC data can be found in one place, it will also benefit other departments and the institution as a whole, as Linda mentioned earlier, because all the information on a customer can then be found easily. This obviously still doesn't mean that manual work is completely eliminated and that all data is collected automatically, but this tool can make the KYC process much faster, much more seamless and unified. And we can move on to the next slide. The functionalities of KYC systems must also be developed to ensure that they work comprehensively, regardless of whether the specialist is at the office or working remotely. This has been very important, especially in the past year, because we have all been working from home, and for the future as well, as remote working becomes more commonplace. Remote work has quite a big effect on the different stages of the KYC process workflow, which normally go through different systems and communication tools, and has traditionally required certain process steps to be carried out in an office environment because certain systems don't work remotely. So the sudden move to remote work meant that certain stages of the KYC process have become more difficult to complete, which then created gaps in the KYC process flow. So as remote working becomes more popular, it is absolutely essential to achieve a fully digitalized workflow, for example, by utilizing cloud services that digitally connects all of the different stages of the KYC process and teams to all internal and external stakeholders involved in the process, and that also comprehensively works in a remote environment so that the expert can then handle the entire KYC process remotely from start to finish. Ensuring this unified remote workflow also improves customer experiences because customers can then avoid possible waiting times. For example, if part of the process has to be handled in an office environment by a different person, meaning that every step has to be waited for separately. Also, customers can be served in a more multi-channel way, potentially outside an office's normal opening hours. But as with everything else, there are certain risks involved. In a remote work environment, the protection of sensitive data must be taken into account, as the processing of this information, for example, at home, increases the risk of data leaks. So the use of cloud solutions, for example, could help guarantee the implementation of security standards, authentication and encryption methods, as well as the backing up of data securely, which could then help effectively manage these risks. All in all, as with all of the risks involved in digitalization, when these risks are effectively identified, tested, and managed, the long-term benefits significantly outweigh the risks. And we can move on to the very last slide. Thank you very much. And feel free to contact us if you have any further questions. Here are our email addresses.
Thank you, Laura and Linda. That was very insightful. Now our very own Thomas Osinga will continue with his presentation, walking through the practical side of the customer due diligence processes.
Yes, thank you, Johanna. Good morning, everybody. I'm Thomas, and I'm responsible for Signicat's AML service offering. And during this presentation, I will share some of the usual challenges we encounter when we try to help our customers with their AML compliant onboarding process. As usual, the disclaimer applies. Let's start with the bright side of life first. In Europe, things on a high level at least are quite harmonized. I think Laura just mentioned the FATF, which comes with their recommendations on the international level. All these recommendations are implemented in the European directives, the AMLDs 4, 5, and 6. And then these directives, they serve as a template for the domestic laws. And as a result, the domestic laws are, at least on a high level, quite similar. I wrote some of the examples or some of the laws here on the bottom. You see even the titles are quite similar. If we look at a few examples here, let's take Norway. You don't have to understand Norwegian. I just marked a few typical items which you see in every country. For example, here the attributes which need to be collected: name, date of birth, identification number, place of birth, gender, nationality, address. Then the valid ID, the gyldig legitimation, is mentioned. And then on the bottom, the reëel rettigheidshaver, which is Norwegian for the ultimate beneficiary owner, the UBO. And then on the bottom, you see the PEP, the politically exposed person. Probably very familiar terms to some of you. If you look at Danish law, for example, again, without understanding Danish, you'll see the same attributes: name, CPR number, the national number in Denmark, date of birth. Then you see pålidelig or uafhængig kilde, so the data needs to come from a reliable and independent source. Then the UBO is mentioned again, and then the ownership and control structure is being mentioned. Very familiar to what we've seen before. And if you look at Germany, again the same. The wirtschaftlich Berechtigte is being mentioned, the UBO. Identification needs to take place, and again name, place of birth, etc. So on a very high level, it looks quite similar. And you could even summarize it in this way. This is a model we typically use in Signicat for depicting a typical CDD process. It contains or it consists of 4 activities: identity proofing, an activity called by us called the core CDD, the risk assessment, and the ongoing monitoring. Well, identity proving, that's traditionally where we in Signicat, of course, come from, validating remote identities, identifying the customer, which can be a natural person or an organization, and also verifying the identity, which is verifying the person behind the screen, which can be the customer, but it can also be somebody who represents the customer, maybe an employee who opens an account on behalf of an organization. Then the core CDD needs to take place. Ownership and control structure, of course, need to be established. Screening needs to happen, and the customer profile needs to be made with the source of funds and the source of wealth. And if you have collected all this information in activity 1 and 2, then you need to do a risk assessment based on the data you collected. You use a decision matrix for that, and as a result, you'll get a risk rating, typically medium, high, low risk, for example. And based on that risk rating, you start your ongoing monitoring. And if things then change, either in the CDD, so for example, somebody changes address or an organization changes ownership structure, you need to redo your CDD. So it can be a change can be a triggering event to do a new CDD process. And also, of course, you also need to monitor financial transactions. Well, all of this information, which is coming from these 4 activities, needs to be stored in a KYC file. so that if the authorities come, that you have enough evidence to prove that you did your job in line with the requirements in the law. And the whole the goal of this process is, of course, the activity on the right to report suspicious activity. Well, this is a high-level summary of a typical CDD process, which applies to, I would say, all European countries, but even internationally, because they are derived from the FATF standards, these laws. But it's not all sunshine. If we look at the typical challenges we encounter, there are at least 3 which come to mind. Of course, we try to help our customers with remote or digital identification. And then things get a little bit less aligned between countries. So each country defines their own approved identification methods or their own approved remote identification methods. And I'll show you a few examples. Another challenge is to get access to the right data for the due diligence, to get access to reliable and independent data. And you need to make sure that definitions are being used in the same way across borders. I'll also show you a few examples of that. So to start with the first one, an example on the left from Norwegian law. The law clearly describes that there's a list with approved remote identification methods. And if you then work your way down to the law, you end up at the Norwegian Communications Authority, which publishes the list of approved remote identification methods, like bank ID and bypass, etc. So that's how Norway has solved this challenge. Germany has done the same. They define it in their law, but they don't have the same list. They have 4 approved identification methods. And if you then, for example, take method number 3 here, the qualified electronic signature, which is referring to an European standard, the EIDAS standard, then the Germans, they wrote in their law that it needs to be combined with a payment transaction from a bank account, de Transaktion unmittelbar von einem Zahlungskonto. So this is a typical German requirement, which is not which is not applicable in Norway, at least not written in the law for the time being. So you see that you really have to get familiar with the local requirements if the local requirements apply, of course. Another example of the challenges which I mentioned, the reliable and independent data. If you look at Norway, which is quite a highly digitized society, then you need to get address data from natural persons. You get that from the state population register. But in order to get access to that register, you need to have a Norwegian organizational number, and you need to sign your application to get access with a Norwegian EID. Well, this can be a challenge for some international financial institutions who don't have a legal entity in Norway, so who don't have a Norwegian organizational number. And another example is that there is no UBO register yet in Norway. It's being worked on, but the obligation to identify the ultimate beneficiary owner is there already. 2 examples from Germany. There is no accessible state address register for natural persons, so you need to get your address data or the source which you use to validate an address needs to be a commercial supplier of address data. There is an UBO register in Germany, the Transparenzregister, but for example, foreign participations, a lot of data is lacking. So these are examples of challenges related to getting hold of reliable and independent data. Then the third challenge, which I mentioned, the definitions, which can be used in different ways. On the top left, you see an example of an ownership structure where person A is owning 26% of business X, which is then owning 26% of business Y. While in Norway, person A would be an UBO because the 25 or the higher than 25 threshold applies to both ownership levels. But in Germany, the regulations are different. And person A would not be regarded as an UBO in Germany. On the right side, you see another example. There's a person A, which is a PEP, and this person lives together with person B. In Norway, and somebody who lives together with a PEP should also be regarded as a PEP according to the law. But this is not the case in Germany. So in Germany, person B would not be a PEP, while in Norway, person B would be a PEP and enhanced due diligence should be performed. So this is an example where definitions are slightly different. And then one bonus challenge, which I didn't mention in my list, but this is, I think, something where Signicat really provides a lot of value. There are many services needed in order to fulfill all obligations. So if you only look at one country, for example, Norway, you see already that you need 8 different services or information sources in your process in order to become compliant. So an EID, but then for foreigners, you need a solution to do document scanning. You need the population register, which is required by law. You need access to the business register to define to get organizational information. The shareholder register, you need to do a PEP check, sanction check, and you need to check for the UBO. So 8 different sources, all requiring their own also technical integration and their own contracting. And this is hopefully where we can help. We try to be in Signicat. We try to do one-stop. We try to do one-stop shop for customers who have these needs and who are experiencing these challenges. So we try to offer you one contract to give you access to all the services you need. We give you one harmonized data model, so you only need to relate to one technical data model which contains the same data regardless of where the data comes from. So a birth date is always a birth date in the same format, and a family name is always a family name. And a shareholder percentage is always a shareholder percentage and not voting rights, these kinds of things. So a harmonized data model. And also for each of these 3 underlying services, so electronic identification and document verification and attribute providers, for each of these we provide one API which gives you access to many of the different methods below, or many of the different data sources below. And of course we have international coverage and local know-how of local regulations as well. A different way to depict this is to mark in the typical CDD process where we can help. So that's what I did in this slide. I marked in blue what we in Signicat can help with. So we help you with getting hold of the data. We help you with monitoring the data, but we cannot take over the obligation or the responsibility for the risk assessment. And we also don't store data. So the data in the KYC file needs to be stored by yourself in your own backend systems. So this is in a nutshell what I had to share, Johanna.
Thank you, Thomas. That was very interesting. So as I said at the beginning of the webinar, so please do use the Q&A functionality if you have any questions. We have a few questions that we have received from the audience that we can start going through. First, we have a simple question that reminds us that why it's important to clarify a terminology. We have a question: what is CDD? I think anyone should be good to answer that one.
Yeah, well, I can do it as I used it quite a few times in my slides. Yeah, terminology is being used very differently by different actors and also across border. But what we mean with CDD is the customer due diligence process. So everything you do in order to establish the customer identity and the required background checks. But it's very similar to KYC. It's just a different abbreviation, you could say.
Yeah. Then I have a couple of questions to the Deloitte experts. What type of services related to KYC do you offer at Deloitte? I think maybe some people have associated you as experts in many different other areas, but you have a lot of expertise in KYC as well.
Yes, definitely. We have an international network of quite experienced AML and KYC professionals working at Deloitte that have a lot of hands-on experience and knowledge of AML legislation, and have experience in and offer services ranging anywhere from KYC remediations to the optimization and implementation of KYC processes. So basically aiding organizations in planning, training, and implementing these processes. But we tailor the services according to the organization's needs. Yeah.
You walked us through this interactive KYC tool. Have you implemented this with customers already?
Yes, or actually we both have a lot of prior experience in this from working at the bank. And we saw firsthand how much of a difference the implementation of this kind of interactive tool made in the quality of the KYC forms, and also with how much time it was saved when a lot of the manual work was removed with this kind of solution.
Yeah. Laura, you spoke about the KYC process flow and mentioned that migration to a semi-digital process can result in gaps in that process. Correct me if I'm wrong. What would you, and that's usually, we at least experience that customers often, when we start talking about digitalizing processes, so, and it's right that they want to understand the risks related to that. But the fact is that many still have KYC as a manual process. What are the key risk areas in the manual processes?
Do you mean from working in remote environments or
yeah.
In the manual processes? Well, obviously it's very time consuming, and with manual data, there's a lot of sensitive customer data that has to be handled by the expert working on them. So that always increases the risks of data leaks. But as I mentioned before, there's lots of technological solutions like cloud services that could help you manage these risks from working remotely. So that's the first thing that comes into mind. And Linda, feel free to jump in if anything else to add.
Well, I would like to add that all kind of manual work has a risk of human errors. So therefore, it's very important to think about the possibility of, for example, robots that do exactly what you force them to do. So therefore, this kind of manual work has a very large of risk of human errors.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's a very good point. Would you say that going 100% digital or as much as possible would be the best way to solve or mitigate the risk of manual error? Or how much, what would be the, should everybody aim to go 100% digital with their KYC?
I don't think so that it would be 100%, because we need to think that all of our businesses has high risk customers, even though it's just a fact. And it's always good that there could be even some kind of experts that could handle those high risk customer risks. So therefore, I don't think that it's goal to be 100% digital, but as much as possible. So then those KYC experts can use their time just for this suspicious customers and activities, and all of the normal risk customers could be handled digitally.
Yeah, and just to add that, obviously, technology and robotics is only as intelligent as we perform it to be or program it to be. So obviously, we would still need to check it to make sure that there are no errors in that as well. So it can't be 100% digitalized.
What would be your advice for an organization that would like to redesign their KYC process?
Yes, it's a very relevant question, and a lot of organizations are actually now doing that. I wouldn't rush on anything, so it's very important to make these kind of decisions very properly. So there will be no risk of like possible KYC remediations and backlogs because of this kind of huge change. But I would really recommend for this kind of changes and for being more digital, because a lot of organizations still have very I would say old school systems for this KYC, and it's for possibly because it's so new thing still. So I think 10 years ago this wasn't relevant as much as it now. So a lot of organizations are now fixing those, and yeah. And I would always utilize the external experts just to make sure that you have some kind of support and knowledge if you don't have it by yourself.
Yeah, and it's also very important to consider the size of your organization and different implementation considerations that would come into play as well.
Yeah. A question to you, Thomas. So Signicat delivers solutions for customer, know your customer, especially doing onboarding. What could you tell about the total solution that Signicat can deliver for KYC compliant onboarding?
So you could summarize it in this way. So we help with the remote identification via all possible means, via EIDs, via document verification, so the scanning of a passport via your camera of your mobile phone, or via NFC reading of the chip. We help with the liveness check. We help with collecting all relevant background data, so address verification, ownership information, UBO, screening, those kinds of things. And we can monitor all the data which I just mentioned. And from there, the risk management services and processes of the customer take over. So we give you the data in order to do your risk assessment. And from there, the risk assessment can be made, and that basically concludes the due diligence or the KYC.
Yeah. How about for a cross-border? We see that there are, a lot of Nordic digital banks that have a very fast go-to-market strategy. So for an organization that's looking into expanding to new markets, how could Signicat support in that kind of expansion?
Yeah, I think both with delivering the required services, and also by contributing with some local expertise. We have offices also in the Benelux and in the DACH region, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and we're growing rapidly and gathering more and more knowledge outside of the Nordics. I think those two things are the main ingredients. So our services and our know-how. Yeah.
Okay. I think that was all the questions from the audience. So thank you, Laura, and thank you, Linda. That was very insightful. Thank you, Thomas, for walking through the practical aspects of the KYC process. And thank you for the audience for attending. We will share the webinar recording afterwards. And as well as the presentation. And if you have any questions, so reach out to us or Laura or Linda with any questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.